All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started. It's 6 p.m. and we want to honor your time because Monday night, y'all. It's Monday night. So my name's Tracy Castro-Gill, and I'm the Executive Director of Washington Ethnic Studies Now. I just want to share Washington Ethnic Studies Now is a 501c4 nonprofit organization in the state of Washington, committed to advancing ethnic studies and racial justice in K-12 education. A lot of the folks who you'll be hearing about who created ethnic studies in Seattle Public Schools, or at least the current iteration of ethnic studies in Seattle Public Schools, are current WASN members and or leaders. So a lot of us moved out of that work and into the nonprofit realm to continue to move the work forward. This is going to be really informal Q&A with the panelists. And if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and I will ask when appropriate as the host. So we're going to start with introductions. And if we can start with Rita, please, if you would introduce yourself. Rita, you're muted if you're talking. Okay, we'll come back to Rita. How about Shraddha?
Hello, everyone. My name is Shraddha Sharude. I am a teacher in Seattle Public Schools, and I am the one of the curriculum directors at Washington Ethnic Studies Now as well. Oh, I use she, her pronouns, and my racial identity is Indian American, East Indian, Southeast Asian.
Thank you. Kyle.
Hi, folks. Kyle Kinoshta. For the purposes of this panel, I'm a former Seattle Public Schools District Administrator. My role was Chief of Curriculum Assessment Instruction. He, him pronouns, but I wear a variety of different hats and different roles, work in the community and, do some higher ed work. My identity is Japanese American or Asian American or member of the API community. Thanks. And also, by the way, sustaining member. I just want to make sure I give that plug.
Thank you, Kyle. Looks like we lost Rita, so hopefully she comes back. John.
Hey everybody, John Greenberg, he, him, white American, and I'm an educator in Seattle Public Schools, a member of WASN, of course, and then also youth coordinator of, could you do that work? Could you see it? Okay. From the Washington NAACP Youth Council.
Thank you. Rita, are you there? You're still muted.
Said she was having a hard time hearing audio, so hopefully we can fix that soon.
Oh no. Oh, you're unmuted now, but I still can't hear you. Okay, I will reintroduce myself. So my name again is Tracy Castro-Gill. They, them identify as Chicanekis, and I'm hosting this discussion. I was part of the movement for ethnic studies in Seattle, but I'm going to try to let everybody else tell their stories. So here we go. Oh, let's go back. That's not what I want to do. I want to stop sharing so we can see everybody. So the first question I had was for John and Rita, but we can go ahead and start. And John, if you want to start, what brought you and Rita together to write the NAACP Ethnic Studies Resolution, and what was the NAACP Ethnic Studies Resolution?
Yeah, okay. This is going back into history. And some of it's old history. Like it began for me with in 2012, a white family objected to me teaching about issues of race and racism. And this is right in the wake of things, rumblings, hearing about things happening in Tucson, Arizona. But basically, the district supported a white family trying to stop a curriculum on race and racism, is the short story. And so, yeah, that certainly galvanized me, and also helped me understand that ethnic studies was a way to institutionalize studies of race and racism in the curriculum. And Rita and I got connected through Jesse Hagopian, and in particular the opt-out movement. And so I was trying to figure out my first email to Rita to try to for that partnership, to launch that resolution. And we've emailed, too many times that that's gonna take some research when that happened. But we organized together, assembled a team, including this person, Tracy Castro Gill, to write a resolution in support of ethnic studies, just calling for ethnic studies, and then also laying out a clear timeline to do that. And back then, the idea was that the district was also rolling out racial equity teams, and that it could be done through the racial equity teams, possibly. So I think that was in the language of the resolution, which I could always pull up at some point as well. But yeah, so we launched, I don't want to talk too much, but we had to launch very publicly because I was trying to work from the inside to try to get the district to do it through something called the Equity and Race Advisory Committee to the superintendent. So we made a recommendation through that committee, and that's the committee that was responsible for policy 0030, which is the ensuring educational and racial equity policy. So that was passed, and this group then put forward the recommendation for ethnic studies, which was ignored by then Superintendent Nyland. And so that's when we had to escalate to get it. And so having Rita Green, if you hopefully you'll get to meet her soon, but she is a force to be reckoned with, and plus with the power of the NAACP behind her, launched on MLK Day 2017 the need for ethnic studies, and that's what really kind of pushed it on the top of the agendas for Seattle Public Schools leaders, which would then bring us to Kyle, who could probably pick up the story there.
Well, hang on, slow down, because you talked really fast.
Oh, yeah, I didn't want to be the one talking so much. I'm sorry.
And Rita, you're in as I see you in as a participant, and I'm trying to promote you to panelist. So you should get a little pop-up that says move into panelist. So, okay. So what school were you teaching at when those parents came after you? Because there are probably some people who don't know that history.
Yeah, again, it's 2012. I mean, it's like a decade old now. But center school, I'm still at the center school. Yes, that answered your question.
Okay, and then you said Jesse Hagopian connected you with Rita. So Rita, we're trying to answer, if we can hear you, we're trying to answer the first question: what brought you and John together to write the NAACP Ethnic Studies resolution? So why was it important to you to join John to get that resolution written? Oh no, technology. Okay, so the resolution was written. We presented it. We had a whole workshop at the MLK Day at Garfield High School. And then it was Richard Burke, right? Rick Burke, who was a school board director at the time, who contacted Rita. Is that right, John?
He was definitely the most supportive school board member. I'm trying to figure out how that all played out. I mean, it's old history right now, and then the pandemic warping our memories as well.
That's why I wanted to get this oral history. Like, we have to document it, right? We have to preserve it. So, oh, Rita, I see you're unmuted. Can we hear you? Dang it.
I did dig up some images from some of the headlines just to try to help refresh the timeline. Can I just share the screen super quick?
Yeah, do it.
Because you'll see Tracy and I in identical poses. But this is us launching it, some news coverage. We basically had the MLK Day workshop as a press release for this resolution, or a press conference for the resolution. So there was tons of media there. And Tess is somebody, and Abram was working within the district. So of course he faced heat for, he was within the Department of Racial Equity Advancement. Back then it was called something different, but what's called DREA now, he was one of the leaders of that department. This was somebody who was still finishing grad school at the time, Tess Williams here. And this is of course Rita, who hopefully will pop in, but Tess Williams had a PowerPoint that showed pivotal figures in US history, starting with a lot of white ones who are household names, but then a lot of pivotal change makers of color who are, barely, the names barely recognizable to a lot of Americans, let alone like being able to connect their face to who they are and what they did. But I know that PowerPoint, first without their names and then with their names, played a key role in helping that one school board director, Rick Burke, see that there was an issue. So I just want to give credit to Tess and the power of, the power of slides and just showing how mainstream it is, even liberal Seattle, how little we knew about people of color who have been fighting for a better world. But I'll unshare it now. But that was, January 2017.
Seems like just yesterday ago. And so the school board wrote their own resolution. So they didn't fully adopt the resolution that we had written, but they took that into consideration. They wrote their own resolution. They approved it unanimously. Do we remember who was on the school board then? So Leslie Harris is the only one that was there that's still there. Betty Patu, Rick Burke, Jill Geary, Eden Mack.
Zachary Wolf.
It was actually Scott, and now I'm forgetting his name.
The other Native American.
Correct.
Now Pinkham. Yeah, Scott Pinkham. And so that's when Kyle came along. So we'll go to Kyle, and hopefully Rita, when you get your audio fixed, just jump in and let us know.
Yeah, definitely. So
Kyle, what was your role in that?
What was kind of interesting is that the resolution was presented to the board, and of course I read about it in the board documents. And what was interesting, internally, no one was doing anything. I think that, the cabinet level, nobody really knew what to do with it. So nobody really knew that I had a background in ethnic studies. So I kind of raised my hand and said, I'll, take on and work this issue. So, I started doing that, and, I was pretty new then. So I sort of talked to my bosses, and basically I'll have to admit, and Rita, Jean, and Tracy will probably attest to this. I don't think I played a very good role in the beginning. And here's the reason why, because my bosses were saying, okay, here's what you need to do if you're going to work on ethnic studies. You have to, launch a task force. And, task forces are written in the policy, about putting a, group together and, getting a consultant and, getting people on the, committee and writing a charter and so on and so forth. And I think that, at the time, Rita took the lead, and she was the one that was pushing me to say that, wow, if you do all this stuff, it's going to take forever to get ethnic studies. And, this is just, and, I didn't have a lot of history with Seattle, but she pretty much said that, if you kind of do this, this is one of the ways Seattle Public Schools, sends initiatives off to die, by taking so long. And so, I kind of stepped back and sort of thought, oh, what the hell? I've got my bosses pushing me to do this, and I've got Rita from the community saying that I should do that. And so I think what it was sort of sinking in that, yeah, this is going to take forever. So I began to turn around and say, okay, we really need to start pushing this. And that's where, I really began to work in earnest with, Tracy and John at the time to try and get things going. And so, I helped with the board resolution, try and, get that going, and then tried to get going on the actual working on the curriculum. And, just sort of expedite this committee stuff just so we could start working on it. So I think, we went from, sort of, I think, bumping heads correctly on this to me, beginning to see that I really need to work with folks like, Tracy, John, Rita, and the community, and, really start from internally trying to push these processes, which is a whole other story. I'll talk about all the misadventures that I had just in terms of the obstacles that you meet up with when you try and work internally. But I think that's a story of, how we actually began coming together to begin working on ethnic studies. And I appreciate, Rita, Tracy, and John, kind of educating me in terms of how to better work with the community on this. So I'll stop here and, we can talk about some of the rest of the story in a bit.
Are you there, Rita?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So but your video is a little funny because your background is kind of taking over everything, but we can hear you.
Okay, good. I'll take the video off. I know I tried to fix that too. I don't know what's going on. Okay. So are we just doing intros? I'm sorry.
Go ahead and introduce yourself. And then we've been talking about the resolution and we got to the point where Kyle got involved. So if you want to backtrack, please do that.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Rita Green. I'm the NAACP Ed Chair for Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. And we started on ethnic studies in early 2015, actually saying this is what we need. And a lot of that was input from students. So I talked to a lot of kids, particularly a lot of kids of color, and all of them kept saying school is boring. There's nothing that interests me. There's nothing about me or my culture. And so that's when I started asking the kids question, okay, well, what would make it more interesting? What do you feel that you need? And that's when the whole thing about ethnic studies. I need to see me and other people like me, other cultures. I want to know about other people instead of just whitewashed education. So that was the input, and that was the catalyst to start doing ethnic studies. And then as we started researching, I started finding out more and more how much more beneficial ethnic studies was to everybody, not just kids of color, but also to white kids. And so that made it even more important in that all the data showed that all students do better when they have ethnic studies. So that's where we go. That's how we implemented or started working on it. Then, fast forward in dealing with Seattle Public Schools. So I think what Kyle said was right on. I feel that, at first he was kind of a roadblock, but I know from dealing with Seattle Public Schools that is what the driver was of it. And so by then, I've had a few years working with the district and really understanding how to get things done within the district. And I know within Seattle Public Schools, nothing gets done until you go to the board or shame them into doing the right thing, unfortunately. And so as a result of that, it takes a lot longer to get things done right. So they put on the facade of, yes, we want ethnic studies. They passed their own resolution and then put a program manager in the role who didn't believe in ethnic studies. So then it was doomed. For that first year was basically a waste of time. And that just shows how Seattle Public Schools does not value community or respect us for our time. And then after that first year, that bad program manager was ousted, And then we got Tracy. So then we finally started getting some movement with Tracy and the combination of Kyle, because by this time, Kyle got it and understood. So I think the two of them working together, we really started making some movement. Then leadership change and everything went by the wayside. And so then I feel we lost 2-3 years once the leadership changed and got very little traction on ethnic studies. And now, hopefully, we can revigorate that and start back working on it, because I still feel we had made a lot of progress, but everything's at a standstill. And then COVID hit. So now it's time to get back on track with that. Here it is now, 2023, and the resolution was passed in 2017. So in 6 years, and it's still not implemented. That's the test to how slow things move at Seattle Public Schools, particularly when it's things that they really don't want to implement in the first place. When it's something they want, they could get it in and through and in the system. But when it's something they really don't want, they can play this charade game. And, you know, like I said, my experience is I have to embarrass them into doing the right thing.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you're able to share your stories now. I want to, it's so important to get this history down, and we've been wanting to do it forever, so I'm glad we're doing it now. So I want to go back a little bit. So Kyle, once they had the resolution, you had to put together the task force. And I think it's important here to name that you were expected to collaborate on that task force with now Superintendent Brent Jones while he was in his former role. So when we move to talk about the current work of ethnic studies and SPS, it's important to name that Brent was involved in all this foundation laying, right? He was part of that leadership. So you put the task force together, and we met over the summer, and that started out as a disaster. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And then, of course, with Rita jumping in, because at one point, Rita and I just had to take over. But I'd really love to hear how the task force, which were community members, mostly community members of color, what was their initial response, and what did they ask for?
Well, as I said, I think that if you followed the task force procedure that SPS, kind of lays out in their policy, things would take forever. And, it would, kind of drag out. And, really, that would have meant, if I think about the fact that that task force, was launched in the spring and went over the summer, it was be another way to lose a year. So I think that one of the things that was really positive, though, was that we got about 100 people who were just very eager to join that task force. And it was so clear that, when you actually got them talking, they really wanted it to happen. They wanted it to be authentic, and, they really wanted it now. So I think that, in my mind, that was when, again, I thought, okay, we've got to expedite things here. And I think that, Brent at that time was kind of a peer, and it was kind of like we were both kind of laboring under this, policy and procedure that we had to do. And, eventually, I think what had to happen really was to see, okay, we've got to actually subvert that. We've got to actually work with the community. We have to create alliances with the community to, actually get this moving. The problem was, and, again, this was one of the obstacles, is that at the time, people within the organization didn't know what ethnic studies was. They thought it was just something that just took a little bit of effort. They thought it was multicultural education. They thought, oh, we're already doing this. And so, it was going to be a formidable task to actually get the funding to have a program manager. And unfortunately, what happened, as Rita said, someone who was actually being moved out of a building was put in that position of program manager. The problem is that not only did she not know anything about ethnic studies, which is, part of the problem, because people, within the organization thought that, well, anybody can be a program manager. You don't really need to know anything. But, not only did this person not know anything, she basically was pretty hostile to having the community involved. And so part of the behind the scenes work that I had to do is to try and use all these human resource processes to get her out, which turned out to be a fair amount of work. But it was a good thing we did, because that's how we got you, Tracy. The other thing that I had to do is make sure that funding didn't go away, because as soon as you move that old program manager, the talk was, well, we can move that funding, and make it go away. And I said, no, you cannot make that funding go away. We have to hire a new program manager. And, that was, the process by which we then got Tracy. And, we went through all the hiring processes, and John and Rita, were on the hiring committee. Good thing, because then we could justify the fact that Tracy, needed to be program manager. So kind of a long story, but that was how we kind of departed from kind of the bureaucratic approach and really tried to get to work on ethnic studies.
Do you want to add anything, Rita?
No, I think Kyle did a good job explaining what happened.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, just one interesting thing though. I mean, and back then it felt like it was glacial, like to watch it go out of the CNI, the Curriculum Instruction Committee, to the full board. But in retrospect now, I mean, we launched in January 2017, and the board was on. They passed a resolution of support, just a resolution, not a policy, but a resolution of support was passed in July. I think it was July 5th. So I mean, now, with some years in between it, like 5 months seems like pretty quick. And in there, we kind of missed in that history was a lot of school board mobilizations, that Kyle was witnessing. So it was, and that was the easiest thing in the world, because you just put out like a Facebook event, school board mobilization on ethnic studies. And a lot of that would just activate all these college students who were taking ethnic studies class, so they knew what it was, and they would just come out in droves. And so like the first one was huge, and then we still had a few others, and they were always well attended, and it was just like a constant reminder to the board that you need to do this. So it felt slow at the time, but in retrospect, like, I mean, that's like 5 months to get something done. That's almost like HCC families, right?
Yeah. So one of the first things we did after the task force ended, they came away with what I always point to as their three main directives. So we had multiple task force meetings, and we narrowed down their demands, right? It was basically a list of demands. And Kyle called it authentic ethnic studies, but there were three specific things. They wanted it to be done in partnership with community. They wanted it to be interdisciplinary in grades K through 12. And they didn't want us to use textbooks. So I was working with Marquita Princing and the Center for Racial Equity, which is a department within the Seattle Education Association. I had already been doing some organizing work with her. And so I tapped into that network, and I put together a group of educators of color. Well, mostly educators of color. There was like John and Tess were on it also, and a couple other white educators. And we started creating our ethnic studies frameworks. And this also ties into the Black Lives Matter at School week, because when we went from the day event to the week event, this same group of educators wrote the curriculum for that week. And if you listen to our podcast with Deshawn, who started the whole Black Lives Matter at School movement, we also talk about how we kind of forced it. We forced it on the school district, because we already had this group of educators together, and we said, here we are. Here's this week of action. Let's write the curriculum for it and put SPS's name on it. And we put them into this position of having to say, yes, this is SPS's product, or no, SPS doesn't support Black Lives Matter at School, right? And so that's related to the Black Lives Matter at School Week. But that group of educators that I put together, we called the Ethnic Studies Advisory Group. So we created the frameworks, and then after that, they moved into more of an advisory capacity, where they helped determine which direction the ethnic studies program would go into, what type of professional development we would provide. And that's where Shraddha comes in, because she was one of the math folks on that ethnic studies advisory group. So the next question is, what were your experiences as members of the Seattle Public Schools Ethnic Studies Advisory Group?
First of all, I've heard this story from each of you kind of separately, and this has been really wonderful to hear as a whole, put it in together with all of the voices in one space. And it's been kind of like a really important reminder for me of the work that I joined, because it was, I think, already like 5 years almost in the making by the time I joined. And I know that I've become one of the leaders in our community around ethnic studies. But it's so important to be reminded of the fact that I am where I am because of all the work you all put into, even for me to even have the opportunity to join. So thank you for sharing all that. And I just wanted to really honor you all for being the shoulders that I get to stand on. I feel really privileged in this moment to be hearing all of this and knowing the people who stood before me. And I guess on that, right, the whole kind of reason, just a little bit of context for how I even joined ethnic studies, because why would a math teacher be like, yeah, let's do this? It was nothing that I had ever learned about. And I was working at Garfield at the time, and Alexander Ray and Jessica Gopian were there. Alexander Ray is the current SPS Ethnic Studies Program Manager. And he and I showed up at Tracy's house one day. Of course, it was with permission, but and we talked about like, hey, you know, we're interested in ethnic studies. Like, how can we get involved and be supportive and all of that? And then that's when I joined to start working on the math framework, because we didn't have one. And then the Summer Institute happened, and I must be, I don't know how I ended up where I did, because I was both taking the Summer Institute and like unintentionally leading things with Akeen at the Summer Institute, because it was based on the frameworks that myself, Devin Shaw, Tara Hoffman, and Akeen Alston had written that summer. And my experience on the Ethnic Studies Advisory Group is really interesting. It depends on what day you were asking me about. Because being on the Ethnic Studies Advisory Group, I got to learn about and talk about the things that I really passionately cared about and believed about mathematics and my students. I was weirdly pigeonholed at Garfield, which was part of the reason that I ended up with Tracy at her house with Alex, is because I was teaching all the Black and brown students. And I don't even know how that happened, but it did. And that's how I ended up in this position at all. And so then we show up at the Summer Institute, and if that was created in large part because of Tracy and Marquita and all of the work they put in, but also because they had folks like the Ethnic Studies Advisory Group and the Center for Racial Equity coaches who were working with them to put on this institute. And that was like a life-changing institute for literally every single person that I talked to that went to it. Like, it completely changed how they approached teaching, how they approached the purpose of their jobs and their passion. Like, it was life-changing for all 100 people that went there. And so that was that was my experience and understanding of the Ethnic Studies Advisory Group. That was what I knew of it coming into that school year. Every time we would go, we had like one day a month where we got a sub to cover for us, which, you know, let's be real, it's an insane amount of work for us anyways. But we would go and have these days where we would sit there, we'd do curriculum development, or we would be working on editing a framework or developing professional development for ethnic studies, depending on what the agenda was for that day. And also it provided us with opportunities to have partnerships with educators across the district, which I really loved, actually getting to know people outside of my building. Especially knowing that there weren't a whole lot of educators of color in my building. And I think that's true for most schools. It's not so much the case at the school I'm at now, but that's, you know, so that was really an uplifting experience. And I have a lot more to say on that, but I won't, because I know I'm a little bit long-winded as I'm a storyteller and this is storytelling. So I'll just get to the kind of cut and dry of it. The worst experiences were when people from downtown joined us. Those were the times that we had to deal with people crying, being upset at being, I don't know, being told that they might not have the expertise that a teacher doing the actual work has. And that was apparently like really upsetting to know that you're not an expert in things you don't do. And we were also yelled at by the superintendent for doing Black Lives Matter curriculum. Told that wasn't our job and that we were wasting our time by doing that. And so that made it pretty freaking clear about what the belief was of Black Lives Matter at school on the part of our superintendent at the time. And it was clearly that it was not a priority, and much less than that it wasn't a priority. She didn't actually give a fuck about the work we were doing. She just wanted to make sure that her checklist got checked off. And that was what she thought we were there for, was to help her get her tasks done. And no one in the advisory group saw our job as a list of tasks. It was really life work and passion work. So the Ethnic Studies Advisory Group was an amazing experience, unless the white women from downtown joined us, to which then we had to work on making them feel okay that people were working instead of just, I don't know. That's all I'll say for now.
Rita, did you want to say something? I thought I heard you.
Oh, she was very passionate about her comments. I thought it was great, and that's typical with Seattle Public Schools. You know?
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate. It really is, and it's a lot of wasted time and effort, which I still, after I've been doing this work for, I don't know, 12, 13 years now, and I still just can't wrap my head around why all the roadblocks from Seattle Public Schools. I'm not sure what they are trying to gain from that, but, you know, we all should be trying to improve education for all students. I also want to be clear that with ethnic studies, it's not just a class. It's about embedding it in all of the classes, all of the education. So it's not a separate thing. It's just embedded in all of the work.
Yeah. And so I want to be clear too that we started the Ethnic Studies Advisory Group under Larry Nyland, and he was there for a very short time once we had that group together. And then we switched to Denise Juneau. So help me, Shraddha asked this question too. What year did Juneau come on?
18, 19.
That would have been at 2018 when she was hired. And so her first full year, I think, was 2018-19.
But she was busy listening in the beginning, right? On a listening tour.
Yeah, okay. John, you want to add anything about your experience as an Ethnic Studies Advisory Group member?
Well, just for documenting history, I mean, the one thing that was really powerful that, you know, we learned would change when Juneau came on board was that under Nyland's, he had smart goals, right? And one of the smart goals, or I think it was number 6, included ethnic studies as part of the strategy to achieve that goal. So, you know, it was probably the goal around some of the racial disparities, and ethnic studies was codified or named specifically in all the documents that was going to be how we do it. And then when Juno, switched and then developed her strategic plan, ethnic studies was nowhere. So kind of a win that we had with Nyland was lost. Even though it wasn't quite clear in the beginning of 2018, 19, like the adversary essentially that she would become against ethnic studies. But that was, but Shweta, what you said is like it was like the best. ESAG, I still don't know about that name, ESAG, like digital sagging, but the best was that we like had all these like-minded racial justice advocates had all this positional power to go across the district and do these trainings that Tracy and Marquita, and others, the Center for Racial Equity for the union, it was just the synergy of people where it felt like for the briefest of time, like before what happened, it just seemed like there was no way we finally were winning, like racial justice was actually winning. And generally speaking, that's just like a big history of losses in SPS. And for a brief time, it looked like we were doing, we had people who we thought were allies in HR. We had Tracy as a program manager who was certainly under fire all the time, like pretty early on, like always felt not with a lot of allies in that space, but then educators across the district, but there just seemed like there was such widespread support that it seemed like we were unstoppable. And then Juno became that blockade. But just also, I just want to acknowledge that Tracy had a plan right now. Ethnic studies in 2023 is there are certainly pockets of good things happening across the district, no doubt. But like in terms of the rollout, it is all digital. And I know there's just a handful of students across the district enrolled in, Black studies. So not a huge turnout. Was never supposed to be digital when Tracy Castro Gill was the program manager. It never would have been a digital rollout, pandemic or not. And that's what it is. But how the plan back then was that you were going to cross credit existing classes that could become ethnic studies. So you didn't have to create new stuff. You could just, because there's no space in schedules for something new. So it had to work within the existing framework and structure. And that's what was happening under Tracy, and all that. Like we lost everything when they pushed Tracy out, because that dismantled ESAG. And I'll put the article in the chat for the story of the pushing out Tracy. But just like for a brief moment, we had so much, and then we still do because the fight lives on through WASN and other and the NAACP Youth Council, but it's just that positional power is no longer there.
Well,
In SPS.
I was just gonna add, like, to John's point, right? It wasn't the reason that things were going so well. I don't think had much to do with positional power as much as it had to do with a lack of needing to be in fight or flight mode. And what it really was, I felt at least, was that there was joy in the work. Because what it's become now is that the amount of fight that we have to do, there's a lot less joy in the work that we're doing. And so it makes it harder to do it because we're exhausted, because we're constantly fighting, which is what you all were doing before that positional power shifted and stuff, right? Is you were constantly having to fight for everything. And then when finally we could stop fighting and we could do what we do best as ethnic studies educators, which is create curriculum that brings joy and resilience and liberation for our students, the community, the students, the teachers, and even the people who were actually doing the work downtown, like Tracy and Kyle, they were experiencing a lot more joy. We were just happier. And that's what let us do the work. And that's why it was happening so quickly, because we were happy. And it's so much harder again because we have to fight again. And fighting is so much harder than doing things in joy.
So Tracy, I wonder if you want me to ask me that question. What are the obstacles? Anyway, I'm sure everyone. So
we only have 15 minutes left, so let's talk about that. And one reason why I asked all these beautiful people, not just because they were part of the movement, is I'm not allowed to tell my story and why I was pushed out. So if you want to address that,
Okay, I'll try and be brief, but there are three things, if you want a nutshell. Why does it feel like you're fighting a sea of molasses? in Seattle Public Schools. Number one is that there's a system imperative that's been in place since No Child Left Behind, which is the whole system is geared toward success in high stakes testing, which means that that's a priority, which is why is it so hard to get ethnic studies in as a priority? Well, you're fighting that, and you're fighting people who've been kind of brainwashed to think that that's the most important thing, which is why, you know, you can't get people to listen. So I was told one time, you know, in a meeting when I was trying to get Black Lives Matter on the principal agenda, and I was confronted by a Black woman principal who was known for bumping test scores really high. And she said, why do we need Black Lives Matter? So I'm in the awkward position of saying why, yes, we need Black Lives Matter, and arguing against this because of the fact that it's not a test score priority, you know. The other thing, it's combined with the fact that, as I said, people think they know what ethnic studies is, and they don't. And, you know, the explanation about Denise Juneau is that one of her calling cards becoming a superintendent was that she put in place a Native American curriculum in Montana. So she thought she knew much better than all of us about what ethnic studies was. And, you know, she thought that basically, you know, because of that, it doesn't need resources, it doesn't need attention, et cetera, et cetera. And then the third thing is that, you know, the culture of whiteness and the culture of nice, which means that if you try and point out that, no, this is what ethnic studies is, and no, you know, we need to get rid of the roadblocks, people get offended. And, you know, the thing it is, they're the roadblocks, but they turn, you know, basically the anger back on us, saying we're not team players because of the fact that, you know, we call out you know, obstacles and things like that. So, you know, this is to all the leaders who are trying to do ethnic studies in other districts. You will probably meet this. And so that's what it's about. And that's what you actually have to fight strategically anyways.
So what I'd like to add to that is that's where the community really comes in and steps in, right? Because as a community member, I can push from the outside. I can say things that you can't say when you are within the district. And so that's one of the things that I try to do is play that part, that this is how we work together, because it is needed. If the community is putting outside pressure, then it forces the district to have to acquiesce. And so that's what the stipulation was around ethnic studies. I know that the board did not want ethnic studies, but we put so much pressure from the community with the students. And I mean, we had like over 40 different community organizations that signed on to the ethnic studies resolution. So with all of that outside pressure, that compelled the board to adopt an ethnic studies resolution. And so for anyone who is doing this, you've got to work with your community, because they're going to be your ally. They're going to be able to say the things that you want to say, but you can't say. And you work with them and use them in that manner, because then that's how you can work together in tandem to get what needs to be, what you're trying to get.
John, Shraddha, barriers.
Well, if we're talking about barriers, then I'm gonna say it. All right. Admin. When we come into your building to do training, because you asked somebody to come and do training in your building, if your staff is being racist towards a presenter, especially a presenter of color, and especially a Black woman presenter, collect your people. Because that's what fucking started all of this downfall. All right. It was a white man principal who had who could not handle the fact that maybe his staff were not ready to even do a basic ethnic studies 101 because they were racist. It's okay if you are racist, if you acknowledge it and work to change it. It is not okay when you know, or if somebody has told you that you're a racist and you're like, oh, well, I disagree. Nobody gives a fuck if you disagree. Okay, you need to fix that. And when that doesn't happen, and then you know, who are we going to turn to as teachers of color when that's happening? HR? Hell no. We know HR is not for us. We know who is for us, the ethnic studies program. So of course, where do we turn? We turn to Tracy. And this is all where Tracy, like how she fucking got pushed out, was because she advocated for a teacher of color, specifically a Black woman educator who was leading professional development on behalf of Seattle Public Schools in her role as program manager, because of course that's what you should do. In the same way that admin need to have their teachers' backs when there's issues with parents, program managers should be having the backs of the people that are pushing out the programming. And Tracy did. And because of that, everybody's feelings got hurt. And suddenly Tracy is being escorted out of the building on the night, like the day before Black Lives Matter at school begins, after we had just been yelled at by Superintendent Juneau for writing Black Lives Matter curriculum. Then Tracy's escorted out the day before, so we have no support during the week to actually do the things that we were going to do. So we have to try to do this ourselves with no one who isn't a full-time teacher supporting us in that. Like, that was insane. And that was a huge fucking barrier. And I can see it right now on everybody's face, how fucking traumatizing this stuff was for all of us, right? The whole energy in this Zoom call just changed. And I don't apologize for that, because this is the energy that we have had to sit there and process through. And people don't know in the background, right? They just think that, oh, there's some drama happening. No, it was literally us backing each other up when white people were telling us that what we were doing was divisive, or that this wasn't okay, or because I'm feeling uncomfortable, it's your fault, and projecting their problems onto the people who were invited in. Right? The teacher I'm talking about was asked to be there. The reason that Tracy got kicked out has nothing to do with anything except for the fact, quite frankly, I believe that people don't like it when you're told point blank where your growth spots are. At the end of the day, just like what Kyle said, the culture of nice. Because somebody didn't coddle you and make you feel good and then help you, they didn't sandwich the feedback. They just said what the feedback was. It made you feel bad, and then you decided that it was going to be your task to not only make sure that Tracy left because you had a problem with how she approached things, but to make sure that you dismantled the very program that gave people of color the power to speak and just tell you feedback and give you opportunities to grow. That's what it was. That's what I believe the fucking barrier is that culture of nice bullshit. When you're told what your growth spots are, you don't want to actually change. And then you hear it from multiple people, and now you can't ignore the fact that you have a place that you have to grow. So we're just going to dismantle the very system in our school that allows for these growth spots that are painful, uncomfortable, and make it so you may lose something or some portion of your identity that harms other people. And that's the biggest fucking barrier, is that people don't want to grow.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left. There's no questions in the Q&A. Remember, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in there. I just want to point out that one reason why we chose to do this, one, is to record the history, but also because of the budget shortfall, the Ethnic Studies program funds are on the chopping block. And it's always been my contention that, as Kyle and Rita have pointed out, the community said they don't want this to be a standalone thing. But when SPS set up even an ethnic studies program manager position, they made it a standalone thing. And ethnic studies should be integral to all of the operations of the curriculum and instruction department. But because the people at the district level don't understand what ethnic studies is, they don't have the vision to implement that, to make that a reality. And so they're planning on cutting the budget. So I want to ask you all, what are your thoughts on the current state of ethnic studies and SPS and this suggested budget cut?
So, yes, I get, the budget in the state, all the state districts, it's terrible. It's just kind of criminal that the state is not funding schools. But as far as I'm concerned, it's just like a lot of issues with people of color. Educators of color getting hired in, or programs that serve people of color. It's kind of like this last in, first out kind of thing. People of color, they're last to get hired, they're first to go. In my mind, I think that the thing it is ethnic studies is so far behind that, at the very least, that funding should be kept and it shouldn't be cut because of the fact that it is so far behind.
And I will say, yes, it definitely needs to stay in place, and we still need to work towards getting it implemented, because that is how we are going to decrease the achievement gap.
It feels, I'm just in my feelings, obviously, right at this point, as I get when we talk about the history in the past. And I'm just, how can the district spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on books from Goldie Muhammad to promote ethnic studies, which is, her framework is not ethnic studies. It's an equity, it's a literacy framework. But regardless of that, her framework, she has a new book, right, all about joy. And in her framework, her original Cultivating Genius framework, it has stuff to do with joy. So why would you cut funding from the one department that has been shown, not even just research, yes, research, but literally talk to any teacher of color during that time? What was bringing them joy in Seattle Public Schools? So why are we cutting from the very department and dismantling the very department that supports and brings in joy, when we claim that we want educators of color to be retained and we want students of color to experience joy? We can't cut from the very things that address that. Maybe we shouldn't have spent several $100,000s on a fucking book when we had a group of community leaders here willing to do it for far, far less.
John.
Well, just what I put in the chat is just, it would be a violation of the district's own racial equity policy 0030 if they cut ethnic studies. I mean, if they actually use their policy mandated racial equity analysis tool, which is on their website somewhere, like, it would be a violation of it. So they only ever cite that when it's convenient for them and it makes them look good. But like when it's tough budget times, I bet you they won't be using it. But they should, and that should be our talking points for protesting any potential cut. But hopefully, I mean, it's policy mandated. I don't know why it's an option.
Why can't, is there a reason we can't cut all of our ties with AP? That, since we have to make cuts and everything is thin at the line, let's go ahead and talk about why we should cut AP after what happened with the African American AP curriculum. Okay, just putting that out there.
Also, just want to shout out Alexander Ray. I think he is a good person for the job, and he really knows what he's doing, and he's up against some of the same barriers that we've been talking about tonight. So showing up in support of Alexander, because program managers don't have much positional power without the support of the admin above them and without the support of the community. So I think he's trying to do his best under the circumstances. And so just want to shout that out. Anything
And
else?
then
Go ahead.
I will just say, Tracy, if you're in contact with him, he needs to reach out to the community too. I think I've talked to him once. So if he needs support, he's got to let me know.
All right. So I want to end with reminding you, I'm going to share my screen again, that there are other action events this week. If you haven't already, check out our podcast, The History of Black Lives Matter in the Schools Week with Deshaun Jackson. If you don't know, you should know that this whole movement for Black Lives Matter in the schools started at John Muir Elementary School with an event put on by Deshaun Jackson that received death threats and bomb threats. But he did it anyways. And so we talk about that on the podcast with Deshaun. And then on the right, this is in a collaboration between Washington Ethnic Studies Now, the Seattle Caucus of Rank and File Educators, which is a caucus group of the Seattle Education Association, and the NAACP Youth Council. We've all been organizing for these events. So tomorrow, there's a panel at Roosevelt High School for Counselors Not Cops. After the shooting at Ingram, Superintendent Jones is talking about reestablishing a relationship with the Seattle Police Department, and the students of the NAACP Youth Council are opposed to that. And it's one of the demands of Black Lives Matter at School Week, Counselors Not Cops. Wednesday night, there's a protest at the school board to meet the demands of Black Lives Matter, including ethnic studies and Black studies. Thursday is Young, Gifted, and Black Student Talent Showcase. And what's not on here, but Friday, there will also be a screening of the documentary created by Cece Chan, who was a former member of the NAACP Youth Council about ethnic studies. Am I missing anything? Oh, and if you go to the Linktree BLM at School 2023, there's a link where you can donate to the Puget Sound Black Lives Matter Network. Also, Washington Ethnic Studies Now will gladly accept donations. So if you're inclined, both of those organizations, thank you, Shraddha, for putting it in the chat. And with that, we are at 7:03. So I will thank our guests for showing up and sitting with us this evening. Thank our panelists for being here. Yes, it was very emotional, but it's always good to share space with y'all. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
I'm just throwing it out there for participants. If this is something that you really appreciated knowing about and learning about, and you want to continue to support and you just don't know how, become a monthly sustaining member of WASN. All right, I'm saying it because there's been a lot of times where people have reached out for support and what have you, and like we are a small nonprofit with a staff of 2. And we would love to be able to actually increase our staff numbers and increase the amount of support that we can provide to our community. But we need to be able to pay for that. You guys can see, maybe you can't, I am still at school. I'm a full-time teacher and I do this on the side. And it's because we rely on a lot of volunteer hours from our board members. And so it would really be helpful and great if y'all could consider becoming sustaining members and donating a small monthly amount, like $15 a month. It would really help us to keep up with the demands of ethnic studies, as we are one of the few organizations who are organizing for ethnic studies on a daily basis.
Thank you for saying that. And a lot of the work we were trying to do with SPS has just become the work of Washington Ethnic Studies Now. So, yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.